pressure development. Maybe not exactly 10 times, but you know what I mean. So, anyways, what can you do as a bodybuilder if you're, dead set on pursuing this shit anyways, and you don't want to get fucked up? Obviously the first thing would be to get a basic blood pressure cuff. Stay on top of that, because that is going to be the number one killer of most people is chronically high blood pressure left unaddressed. So I would definitely check that on a regular basis, until you've established some sort of baseline that you can kind of, know to ballpark that's where you're around, regardless of, the time of day. But as far as the kind of ancillaries that bodybuilders could use to avoid dying young, in my opinion, well, if you're genetically predisposed, obviously you'd be best off just not bodybuilding at all. At least, synthetically enhanced bodybuilding is what I mean. But for other individuals, who are blasting shit, taking shit for summer, whatever it is, how would you attenuate that kind of issue? Obviously, the first primary concern, of course, is blood pressure management, and if that's in check, as well as your hematology, looking at your red blood cell count, your hematocrit, hemoglobin, etc. You want to make sure that you are not walking around with sludge blood on a regular basis, and things to combat that in general are wise compound selection, exercise routines, dietary practices as well. So aside from the obvious, managing sleep apnea, blood pressure modulation, etc., first line treatment, in my opinion, or the first thing I would be looking at as far as a potent ancillary would be an angiotensin receptor blocker. This is the kind of thing that literally signals to your heart to grow when you are on cycle. Now, of course, you can mitigate this to some extent, but the main thing is it's going to help keep blood pressure in check. It's going to inhibit the development of LVH. It's going to inhibit cardiac remodeling. It's going to keep your hematology more in line with where it should be, to avoid as many therapeutic phlebotomies, which would in turn lead to less, dumping of certain things that your body may otherwise need in certain physiological ratios that is going to be thrown off if you're donating it on a regular basis in order to get your biomarkers into a sweet spot, as per the advice of many doctors. But yeah, like personally me, I don't even blast, and I still use 40 milligrams of telmisartan per day just as a proactive measure. And I imagine certain individuals with very high blood pressures would probably benefit from something like potentially a higher dose of telmisartan, or graduating up to something like azilsartan, which is more potent at higher milligram dosages. But that would be the main thing. The first time I think I talked about it on video was a video I did a while back called Nandrolone's Effects on the Heart Totally Eliminated, or something like that. Nandrolone's negative effects on the heart completely eliminated by using this medication. So here, you can actually go look at the mechanism of action of angiotensin receptor blockers, how they work at the heart itself to prevent that kind of stimulation. But what they found, via the deployment of high-dose nandrolone, exactly what it was doing to the heart and how to kind of get in the middle of that and kind of, prevent the damage. Now, again, though, this is going to translate directly to humans. We don't have actual data to support something like this, but in practical application, anecdotally, it seems like some of these medications are quite promising in not only preventing the onset of cardiovascular disease, but in addition, potentially reversing it in some cases. But again, this would be discussion to have with your doctor. This is just discussion about educational material for your own personal reference. So this study looked at blockade of angiotensin 2 receptor with losartan, aldosterone receptor, mineralocorticoid receptor, MR, with blah, blah, blah. So basically, this is not even like the number one choice of an ARB whatsoever. And they measured out, the response to DECA, as well as anti-androgen, interestingly enough, to see what would happen. And, the outcomes were kind of what you'd expect for androgenic signaling, for high levels of sympathetic drive as well. Depending on, the compound, of course, some are going to be more problematic in that regard, like trenbolone. Also touched on another study looking at beta blockers, which is another area of pharmacology that I think is not respected enough in the bodybuilding community and not looked at very seriously, because they think it's going to make them fat and or inhibit exercise performance to some crazy detrimental degree that's going to make it impossible to make any further progress, which simply is not the case. Like, there are beta blockers which are far more selective for beta 1 than the other beta receptors in the body, and can actually do their job with the least impact to your fat loss phase and or bulking lean phase, and are relatively benign in terms of even noticing they're in the picture. But what they do pretty well is lower your heart rate, and if they cross the blood-brain barrier, can actually relax you too. Which, depending on your context, depending on what compounds you expose yourself to, this may be an advantageous thing to be deploying something that actually is less targeted and more broad spectrum, like a good example of this is nebivolol versus propranolol. We did a video not that long ago called, let's see, beta blockers in bodybuilding, February 5th, 2021. In this video, we talk about the different choices, why you might use one or the other. And some of the rodent data, they do see beta blockers used in very promising outcomes in terms of the actual structure of the heart and whatnot. And in individuals in real life, I've seen things like nebivolol play a very dramatic role in actually reversing some of the damage of anabolic androgenic steroids. So for me, those are the two classes of medications that are most promising as potential ancillaries to be looking at as a bodybuilder. But of course, obviously the frontline approach should be blood pressure. My computer just fucking froze, but I'm just gonna keep going. Blood pressure, management is obviously the main thing. In addition to that, making sure you don't have sleep apnea, and if you do, treating it accordingly. That could be as simple as positioning yourself differently in bed, or getting a mouthpiece, or getting something that is going to help you avoid apneaing at all costs. In the worst case scenario, you get a CPAP machine and it breathes for you, and you eliminate your incidences of apnea to near zero in a instant fashion. So that is something that you definitely just need to bite the bullet on and get used to. If you have severe sleep apnea, you're going to need a CPAP, and I would recommend getting on that as soon as possible, because it is, like everyone says, the silent killer is high blood pressure, which it is. But among bodybuilders, I would really classify sleep apnea as a silent killer as well. Like, obviously, the blood pressure is a major problem, and sleep apnea can literally cause high blood pressure, by the way. So some individuals who can't even figure out how to lower their blood pressure don't realize how hard their heart is working while they're trying to sleep, and it's literally going to fucking war because they're walking around at 240 pounds lean and have a neck the size of a fucking, I don't know, another guy's goddamn thigh or some fucking shit. Like, they get, not actually, but you know what I mean. So for bodybuilders, like that, those are the main things, obviously. Not choosing dumb compounds. Obviously, it's a pretty no-brainer thing that if you're running a gram of trend for, a year straight, you might encounter some sort of, permanent liver damage or something, or you may encounter some sort of morphological changes to the heart that are fucking really problematic, or perpetually be in a, I don't know, hyper-vigilant state, fucking up your brain chemistry. That's the kind of stuff that is obvious, though, in my opinion, to not, choose dumb compounds and for dumb dosages and dumb durations of time. But the frontline ancillaries to avoid having, major cardiac issues mainly, as well as kidney failure, in my opinion, is deploying a good blood pressure medication that also has a dual action as preventing cardiac remodeling. That would be accomplished via an angiotensin receptor blocker, and I think they are superior to ACE inhibitors. And there's even very promising data on ACE inhibition in the clinical data too that I went over, and ARBs are just more superior overall in terms of the side effect context, efficacy context. And in the studies, it's very, very promising in terms of what they're doing. Like, these rats always seem so prone to getting fucked up by everything, and the fact that these ARBs were able to totally attenuate the damage caused by supraphysiological amounts of androgens is very, very promising. And in practical application, I think it's going to make a big difference on extending the lifespan of many bodybuilders who would otherwise have potentially dropped earlier than they, otherwise should have. So ARBs are extremely promising, as well as beta blockers, in my opinion. Not only are you living in a society now with, stimulant-addicted individuals, combining that with super physiological doses of androgens that are driving up adrenergic signaling all day. You're perpetually redlined in a sympathetic state and not able to kind of rest and digest and get, calm down. Having a beta blocker on hand may be useful as well, in terms of inhibiting the negative effects of the heart and as well as your brain, potentially depending on how selective or broad spectrum you want your beta blocker to be. But those are the two frontline strategies I see as ways for individuals to avoid becoming, passing at a premature age. But ideally, those individuals should not be bodybuilding to begin with. I'm just saying these suggestions as things to run by your doctor if you are a bodybuilder.